Good morning, this is Angela with Burgess Permaculture. Enjoying another gorgeous sunny day here in Portland, Oregon. We've had rain off and on, and right now today I'm soaking up the sunshine. So I figured this is a time of year that I start to tackle my winter squash chores. And I thought I would just talk with you about growing winter squash, show you how I plant them, and some of the tips and tricks for growing them, especially here in the Pacific Northwest. I'm in zone 8B. These are applicable to other zones as well, but your timing may be a little bit different where you are. I know folks that are south of us have already been able to plant their winter squash, and here we're just getting them going. So, couple of things to think about first. I have 1/4 acre. I can't think of a vegetable that I love more than my winter squash. And I wish I had 5 acres just to grow a bazillion kinds of winter squash. Now, I really love Amy Goldman's book, The Compleat Squash. If folks ask me, where do I start going to research what varieties of winter squash will do well in my area, will taste good, are the kind of color and usage and shape that I want, I will always direct them to Amy's book. It is a beautiful, beautiful book, excellent photos, and really good information. Through that book, I actually found 2 of my favorite squash that I grow consistently every year. So I will link to that in the description, by the way. So in growing winter squash in the Pacific Northwest and anywhere, there are some problems or some habits or tendencies that the plants have and that other factors in your ecosystem have that play into cultivating this plant. Again, I have to cram in far fewer plants than I would want on my 1/4 acre. Usually I end up having to buy winter squash. We consume so much of it that I can't grow enough. I wish I could, but I just can't. But again, I can support local farmers and buy from them from what I can't squeeze in here. Winter squash make a fantastic storage crop that needs no refrigeration. So we are typically finishing up the last of our homegrown winter squash in February, and I have sprinkled throughout that time buying a few from the store. When growing winter squash, it's important to research the kinds that keep for a short period of time, like a Delicata, and the kinds that will keep the entire winter, or sometimes even a whole year, like the Hubbard squashes. So I have gone from growing 10 or 12 different kinds of squash, which was just not economically viable for me in terms of buying the seed every year, and then not practical for me in terms of hand pollinating to save the seeds if I didn't want to buy them. And also a number of those squashes that I grew were really pretty and really much more decorative, and the flesh was stringy and watery and not very flavorful. So in the last 20 years of growing winter squash, I have narrowed down the varieties that I think are actually good for culinary use, and I stick to those. I rotate through about 5 or 6 kinds of squash, but there's 3 I grow every single year. I'm going to talk about those 3 in this video today. So in growing winter squash, you need to know that winter squash have delicate roots and stems, and they do not like to be transplanted. They are very prone to transplant shock, and they are prone to croaking very quickly after transplanting. So I typically start most of mine directly sown in the ground. This is a hit or miss strategy where I live. Squirrels, crows, rodents and blue jays tend to dig up the seeds and eat them before they germinate. The crows will sit on my fence posts and watch me plant my pumpkins. I love corvids, they're so intelligent, but daggone, if they could just stop eating my pumpkins, that would be great. So there are strategies for that. You can net or cage the areas where you planted them until they can germinate. That will help with the bird problems. Not so much with the rat problems. If you live in an urban area like I do in Portland that has a notorious rodent problem, that's probably not going to help you. Once the seeds have germinated, they are excellent food for slugs and snails. Slugs love to take your pumpkins and just mow them straight to the ground, especially in cooler weather. So again, for the larger predators, you want to cage them, cage the seeds, For the slugs, the way I deal with that is start your squash later. The problem folks have is they start them too early in the year, and miraculously, despite cool soil temps, squash really like 65-degree temperature of the soil to germinate. But miraculously, some of them are adapted to do well in cooler climates. When it's cooler and more moist out, you tend to have more slug predation. So waiting and starting your winter squash in late May and early June in the ground means that you will avoid some of the slug problems that you might get otherwise. Now, you can also start them in pots. I do this as insurance in case I have done a poor job of protecting my emerging pumpkins from predators. So when I start them in pots, I want to be super careful when I transplant them. When you transplant out any of your annual veggies, you want to be really careful with the stem. In fact, check out my recent video on planting tomatoes, where I talk about how you want to invert the pot and support the young seedlings. So you want to be doubly careful when you're dealing with pumpkins that you don't gaunch the stems or the roots, or it's goodbye pumpkin. But I'm gonna go ahead and plant some today and talk about my 3 favorite varieties. These are my insurance pumpkins that I am going to be starting here, right here. These are my insurance pumpkins. I have a bunch of the ground already, and actually I've had some germinate despite the fact that it's been quite cool. I tend to start them in late May and then do another round in the ground in early June, first week or 2 of June. And a percentage of those will do well. I'm a big advocate of the sheer total utter neglect method of gardening and farming, but pumpkins don't do well with sheer total utter neglect. They need some help. Annual crops tend to need some help. So what I do instead is I shotgun it. I do an early planting, I do a late planting, I do insurance in pots. And that like 3-pronged method tends to get me a more than adequate squash crop for the size of my plot. It's not that I don't grow enough plants, I max out on the space here. Even though I grow them vertically, I put in 2 cattle panel arches this year that will be growing. Well, they currently have runner beans growing up one half and they will be getting pumpkins up the other. And I grow pumpkins all up my fencing for my chicken run. And I also grow them up my gummy berries. I use anything I can for a trellis so I can get more pumpkins in, but I'm still limited. So let's talk about the 3 kinds of pumpkin that I think are excellent. Every year I plant them. My criteria for growing pumpkins are as follows. Is it tasty? Can I use it for the kinds of food that I enjoy cooking? And what is its keeping time span? So all pumpkins have similar disease and pest issues, particularly powdery mildew. You can check out my video on how to deal with powdery mildew on squash. It's a common problem here in the Pacific Northwest. Now, as the squash ages toward the end of the season in September, they always get powdery mildew. That is the plant communicating to you that it is tired, it is winding down, it is opening itself up to being susceptible to powdery mildew because it is reaching the end of its annual life cycle. I don't treat then. I only treat if I get powdery mildew early in the season. Late in the season, it is the way the plant is communicating to me. I am starting to shut down. My life cycle is concluding. So I grow 3 kinds. The first one, which I don't actually have here right now, is Delicata. And I don't have any because I started them a couple of days ago and I don't have any seeds left. I grow my Delicatas because while they are not a good keeper winter squash, they are very tasty. Roasted, you can eat the skin, the rind. When you roast it, you can eat the whole thing. They make fantastic soups, and they are good for making a puree for cooking into other things like bread. I make a lot of bread. So Delicata, I grow it for the culinary potential and not for the storage potential. It's the first squash I eat out of my pantry once they are harvested and cured because I know they will not keep. The second one that I grow, I do have, and I actually didn't save seeds from it last year because I got kind of lazy, and so I had to buy some. I bought them from Fedco, which is my favorite seed company, and these are Burgess Buttercup. This is the best winter squash. I have a video on Burgess Buttercups because I don't think there is a better winter squash anywhere. It is a fantastic, dry fleshed, complex flavor, excellent texture, squash that is family sized that you can use for 1 or 2 meals, and it keeps really well. They keep for months and months. I store them under my bed. They like room temperature on the floor where it's like a little bit cooler, and they'll keep out of the sunlight. They'll keep for months and months and months. Burgess Buttercup, seriously, y'all, I put it cubed in stews, roasted, puree, pumpkin pie. When you're looking for an excellent squash, you want not stringy and not watery, and you want good flavor. Burgess Buttercup has all 3 of those characteristics, keeps well, and is not a ginormous squash you can't utilize well. Can't go wrong with Burgess Buttercup. So in planting it today, the seeds are fairly small because it is not a really big squash. These smaller pots here, I'm gonna grow 3 to a pot. And I just want to push them down. Now, much like beans, when your squash is germinating, the force of the germination and the water absorbed by the seed during that process, and plants do move, they just move so slowly we can't see. The force of the germination tends to push the seed up out of the soil. And so you want to put it down at least 1 inch into the soil. I typically go more than that. I go 2 knuckles. So I take my seed, 2 knuckles. And, dropped one. 2 knuckles. And then I'm gonna water that in really well. So that's my Burgess Buttercup. You might ask me, Angela, are you gonna label these? No, I'm not, because I can tell all 3 of these squash, Delicata, Burgess, and the next one, from each other at the seedling stage, because they do look unique. The next one is one that I actually did save myself and have been able to share with a few folks. This is Oregon sweetmeat. Now, if you read Carol Deppe's book, The Resilient Gardener, great book. I know lately I've been recommending a lot of books. There are a lot of great permaculture and resilient living books out there, so I'll just keep recommending them. The Resilient Gardener is written by an Oregonian, and a lot of her stuff is highly relevant. She produced a variety called Oregon sweetmeat. The sweetmeat squash is a pale rind squash with an orangey flesh. It will keep a very, very long time. And just like the Burgess, it's a very dry fleshed and not stringy squash. Some folks may find it too large for an individual to use. However, it makes very good pumpkin puree, and you can freeze the puree. Please don't can it in a hot water bath canner. Pumpkin puree and pumpkin butter both need to be pressure canned. They are low acid, high density foods and will grow botulism. Please don't hot water bath can them, but you can preserve the puree after you crack into the squash. So, okay, when I say Oregon sweetmeat, this is not Carol Deppe's variety. It's been hard to source. Every year I tried to buy Oregon sweetmeat seeds from her, which she sold online. They were always sold out. So what I started doing myself is I bought regular sweetmeat seeds, and I started hand pollinating with a paintbrush, and then using a twist tie and tying the blossom closed, so that I knew that the seeds that grew out from that would be pure and come true to the variety. And then I saved the seeds. And then over time, I kept selecting the ones that did the best in my climate, even when it was rainy. I picked the ones that were less susceptible to powdery mildew, the ones that had the best flavor, and I kept saving those. So I have Angela's Oregon sweetmeat here. It is adapted to my microclimate, adapted to my property here, and does very well here. Ideally, you would want to do the same thing where you are. Adapt your seeds by selecting yourself and getting ones that are site specific. Permaculture loves to be site specific. Site specific and will do the best on your property. You've picked the best of the best and you've saved the seeds from them. So I've got my Oregon sweetmeat. Same thing, I'm gonna push them in 2 knuckles. And in these larger 1 gallon pots, I plant 5, okay? So I'm gonna grow these out in the pots, and then I will carefully transplant them into the garden. If I have holes from where I planted some directly into the ground because predation or cool soil temperatures meant that I didn't get as many seedlings germinating in the ground as I wanted. These are my insurance pumpkins. So those are my tips for growing and starting winter squash, the 3 best varieties: Oregon sweetmeat, Angela's Oregon sweetmeat, Burgess Buttercup, and Delicata. Again, I grow several others. This year I'm experimenting with a variety called Early Rise that I got from Fedco, and I'm also experimenting with a variety called Naked Bear, which is grown for the pepitas. So we'll see how those turn out. I like to have my 3 main staples, and then I like to rotate in some new ones. Maybe I'll find something I like better than these 3, but so far in 20 years I haven't. So thank you for watching. If you got something out of this, check out my Patreon below. You can contribute to help me make more and more videos. Thanks.